Okay, so thanks for the opportunity to talk with you today. The paper I'm going to present is forthcoming in the transactions of the Institute of British Geography Journal. So if you'd like a pre-publication copy, then please email me. If you want to know a little bit more about sort of the body of work from which this comes from, then I have two sort of websites that are beyond the university which I'm based in, which is the University of Cardiff, the School of City and Regional Planning. And the first one is more human geography related, the spatialmanifesto.com, and perhaps more relevant for today will be stuff on the way in which I engage with my students about these sort of subjects on the citizensustainability.com website. So feel free to have a little look at that sort of thing. So the individual has been cast as both source of and solution to many contemporary environmental problems. Although some individuals may display concern for the environment, actions are often undertaken within a societal context that is driven by a high carbon economy and is thus often ambivalent to environmental issues. To become green, therefore, individuals often have to negotiate a range of trade-offs between their environmental aspirations and the realities of life in a carbon-intensive society. This paper draws on extensive fieldwork at one site at which individuals have explicitly sought to manage these trade-offs, the Centre for Alternative Technology in Wales, or CAT as I will refer to it, and we're lucky enough to have some representatives of CAT and people who kind of know that organisation very closely in the audience. Well, I hope that's a good thing. We'll find out. So ecological problems and environmental crises have become a regular occurrence in the 21st century. The challenge of moving human society towards a sustainable form of development is now broadly acknowledged. It has become a key challenge not only for policymakers, but also a range of stakeholders at a variety of scales. In policy and academic circles, debates have centred on whose responsibility it is to realise a sustainable future, as Blake has identified. So in the second decade of the 21st century, debates continue over the roles and responsibilities of each set of actors when tackling environmental problems. However, the individual citizen is increasingly seen as the growing contributor to the environmental crisis and any sustainable future. Connections have been made between individual decisions to drive and fly, to burn fossil fuels at varying rates, to invest in certain developments or consume particular commodities, and the negative consequences these decisions have for the state of the environment, as Bargering and Mole put it. So in this situation, the individual has been recast as essential to bringing into existence a sustainable future. However, as both citizens and consumers, the goal of becoming green often places the individual in conflict. How can individuals lead green lives in a society that often appears ambivalent to environmental issues? Despite environmental regulations gaining much ground in the developed world, cultures of capitalism and consumption often deter or drown out calls for greener individual practice. As a consequence, individuals are placed in tension. How can they, and how can we, reconcile the greening of lifestyles on one hand and the ideologies of consumption in which we're bound up on the other? As the first quotation from some of the respondents' interviews at the Centre for Alternative Technology outlines, in this situation, individuals have to find a way of living with the knowledge of their negative environmental effects, or try to change their life in difficult circumstances. What strategies are adopted to manage this trade-off? This paper argues that two distinct strategies are adopted to manage the tensions involved in becoming green. A strategy of segregation, where professional practices are separated from personal actions to establish a balance, if not a consistency in everyday life. And secondly, a strategy of alignment, where unsuccessful, sometimes, attempts are made to unify personal and professional practices in line with environmental ideals. So this paper outlines how the inability of these strategies to fully reconcile the tensions involved in becoming green has led to a politics of pragmatism within environmental practice. It argues that this politics offers a way forward for contemporary environmentalism, both within the ecotopian spaces, as we might term the Centre for Alternative Technology, but also in more mainstream spaces where the majorities live our lives. Okay, I'll just briefly go through the next couple of slides, kind of just giving outline. I'm sure we're all really aware of this, the types of individual action that people might attempt when they are trying to trade off or bring together environmental aspirations with the reality of living in a carbon-intensive society. We might get involved in a range of citizen actions, be it reacting positively to pro-environmental regulation, or behavioural change campaigns. We'll be doing our bit if the government tells us to do X, Y or Z. We might take up the opportunity offered by the provision of green infrastructure, be that public transport, be that increasing curbside recycling, or bio-bags given by our local authorities. We might be proactive in lobbying. We might be doing that within the system, using existing traditional established political spaces, trying to get the government to green its regulatory agenda, for example. Or we might be doing it outside those spaces in a far more radical, perhaps illegal way, seeking some sort of public revolution, but doing our citizen action nevertheless for the collective good in this way. Or finally, we might be doing a range of kind of personal responses, perhaps not political with a big P, if you like, but trying to bring our own personal value streams in line with our own practices, perhaps through voluntary simplicity, through downsizing, not seeking to perhaps influence someone else, but only perhaps influence someone else through the power of the good example, rather than something overtly political. Secondly, of course, we might act as consumers, kind of joining sort of 100-year-old campaigns to kind of boycott what we might see as malign products, or perhaps using our economic power as some sort of voting mechanism to support socially just or environmentally benign products or commodities. We might also try to seek to bring together our citizen and our consumer action in particular ways. And as Johnson outlines, we therefore try and look towards a hybrid concept that implies that social practice can satisfy competing ideologies of consumerism, perhaps more self-interested in nature, and broader citizenship, perhaps more collectively interested in nature. But I would argue, however, that all these types of action bring us back to the tension that I've already outlined. As Johnson tells us, there are some ideological contradictions that we're nevertheless tied into in this citizen-consumer hybrid. As Buckley and Gregson tell us, in our everyday actions, there's more than simply information, and there's more than simply cold, hard cash at stake here. One of the most striking things to emerge is the importance of social, physical, and material contexts in which we live our lives. Often, those contexts we have very little direct influence over. Physical contexts, such as access to recycling infrastructures and room for storage and separation of recyclers, as well as social contexts, including shared norms, available time, service provision, and local waste knowledges. All these are critical in shaping our behaviour. So in practice, therefore, in managing the trade-offs associated with becoming green in a carbon-intensive, unsustainable society, involves the individual assuming a responsibility to act, even when this responsibility may demand significant and uncomfortable changes in lifestyle and practices, and when we might not have the means to really get at or change the context in which we live. Ulrich Beck has termed this intentional negotiation of lifestyle and practice as the process of individualisation. In his words, as we can see, it means first the disembedding and second the re-embedding of industrial society's ways of life with new ones. And in these new settings, individuals must produce, stage and cobble together their biographies themselves, i.e. create themselves new contexts and new identities, perhaps, in the ways they want to live their lives. Negotiating personal lifestyles and practices in this way not only becomes a deliberate effort that never ends, in the words of Goldstein and Rayner, it also involves reflexive decisions to determine what Berman describes as what properly belongs to the self and what does not. In this way, individuals stage and cobble together their lives through their everyday practices, attempting to find livable compromises between the realities of the society they're situated in and the personalised nature of their hopes and dreams. This paper then explores the practice of individualisation by investigating how green dreams are cobbled together within the confines of a developed consumer-based society.